Yeah, I'd do the,
Okay.
and when you can't
Oh,
find it afterwards, let me know and I'll try to help you.
Okay.
and my screen says you're recording now.
Yep.
Two are signed in by iPhone.
Yeah, it looks like there's about 28 people here already, Dan.
What is it? You said you had 60 years sold
80
signed up?
registered. 80 registered
80.
as of 5:30, 6 o'clock. So we'll see how many we get.
And so 60 of them are going to be late? Yeah.
Yep.
Is this what we're talking about?
Okay, I'm Zosha. I'm going to get started if you want to monitor the waiting
Will
room and
do.
admit people. Okay, everyone, it's just after 7, so I don't want us to get started too late. Just very quick housekeeping. This session is being recorded so that we can share it later for anyone who can't make the session. Um, this evening we have with us Dr. Dan Undersander, who is a retired professor from the University of Wisconsin with lots and lots of forage experience. So he's always been a big hit in Nova Scotia. So we're very happy to have him back with us tonight. Um, he's going to talk for about 35 minutes. I'm asking that people put their questions in the chat. Zosha and I will monitor the chat and interject with questions as they are relevant, and anything else we'll save for the end. And then we should have some time at the end of the session to um, cover any additional questions that anyone has. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, and I just ask that everyone keeps their mics muted throughout the session, and we will ask Dan to take it away.
All right. You can hear me and everything's
Yep,
fine.
great sound.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to cover this topic in four sub areas. I'm going to first, I think, as an owner, you need to sit down and decide how much forage you really need. And a lot of people don't do that. They just think about how long my pile will last. Um, we also then, once you know what your need is, we need to assess how much inventory you have. We really should look at the forage quality of the different lots because some of your hay will be appropriate for pregnant animals or um, lactating animals and some for dry animals. And we can do best if we can sort out the forage accordingly. And then in the end, we'll talk about some alternatives that you may not have thought of. So with that, first, thinking of how much you need, there's a real nice calculator, and y'all might want to put this on your website. You can download it and make it available to people in Nova Scotia from Dennis Hancock at the University of Georgia for calculating animal needs. Now, I converted it to the metric system, which would be something we'd have to do, but I'm just going to go through with this spreadsheet. We can do it for each category of animal. We put in the number of animals in the blue column, the average body weight in the peach column. It gives a recommended intake rate, and you pick one in the purple, and then it tells you how much feed that herd is going to eat per day. So in this case, the 30 cow dairy herd consuming about 3% of body weight will require 567 kilos per day. If we have 20 heifers to go with that, consuming about 2.5% of body weight, that's another 180 kilos per day, or a total of 747 kilos per day that we need. If we figure 5 months, and I just kind of pull that out of the air, but that takes us to the 1st of May. Hopefully, your pastures will green up in April, but this will cover you a little bit. that means that you need 112 tons of forage for those dairy cows for the year. If we go on to beef, I picked about 20 beef cows, uh, 540 kilos, intake about 1.8% of body weight per day. That's 194 kilos of forage per day that is needed. If you have some stockers along with that, either heifers or steers, put 15 in there. I know these numbers are going to be wrong for everybody, but you can call up the spreadsheet and plug in your own numbers. I'm just putting those in as an example. In this case, with this 35 head of cattle, this grower would need 310 kilos per day, which works out to be about 46 and a half tons for the 5 month period. If we're looking at sheep, and again, I don't know what herd sizes are, but if we have about 30 ewes late gestation and 25 early lactation, we would want more feed intake for the lactating ewes than the late gestation. But in this case, it works out to be 112 kilos per day, which is 16.8 tons for the next 5 months. Now, if we have horses, and I don't know how many you have, I really look at horses as hay burners, but I just put in one mature horse at 540 kilos, one late station mare at 540, and one yearling at 270. That works out to about 46 kilos of forage per day. And so we need almost 7 tons of forage for the next 5 months for those animals. These are just calculations of our need based on the assumptions I put in. I would encourage you to get the spreadsheet and download it and figure it out for yourself so that you have some numbers to work with. Now, the next thing to keep in mind is that the animals eat kilos of forage, not number of bales, not sizes of piles. But we need to then come back, if we're doing our inventory, figure out how many kilos of hay that we have. And the weight of kilos per bale will vary. And this is with round bales, with bale density, and with bale size. So if we have a 1.8 diameter round bale, if the bale density is 160 kilograms per meter, which is not uncommon, that's 248 kilos per bale. But if we're making that bale at 240 kilos per cubic meter, then we have 430 kilos per bale. That's 51% more in the hay in the bale, just depending on the density of the bale. Now, similarly, if we think of silage, again, the density can vary. If we have a silage tube at 1.8 meters diameter, which I presume is kind of a standard size for you all, if the density is 190 kilograms per cubic meter, which is on the low side, but not uncommon, then you have about 154 kilograms per meter of tube. If, on the other hand, the density is up where it should be, around 240 kilograms per cubic meter, then the weight of the silage is 205 kilograms per cubic meter. That's 33% more. So I would encourage you, even if you have tubes, to mark off a meter, calculate, collect the silage from that length, and then measure it in your TMR mixer or whatever, so that you get a better idea of what you have. Otherwise, you could easily be off by 30%. Similar with a silage bunker, I figured 6 meters wide, 3 meters high. If the density is 190 kilograms per cubic meter, then, we have 1,026 kilograms. And I did this per third of a meter because that's the amount of silage that we would recommend taking off the face of a bunker every day, 30 centimeters or 3/10 of a meter. If, on the other hand, the density is as we would recommend at 290 kilograms per cubic meter, then the weight from a third of a meter off the face of the bunker is 1,566 kilograms. That's 52% more forage just based on the density of the forage in that bunker. So again, knowing the density of the bales you're buying, a lot of people are going to be selling hay by the bale. Know what the weight of that bale is to see if you're getting a reasonable price or not. And the same thing as you're feeding your own silage or buying it, look into the density of the silage to determine how much forage you truly have. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, once you've determined your animal needs, you've determined your forage tonnage, is to do the forage analyses and determine how much of each quality of forage you have. Technically, a forage lot is the forage from one field harvested in one day. Now, minimally, I would at least consider lots to be from forage of similar fields harvested within 2 or 3 days, because that will save you on the number of analyses to perform or what you may have separated. At least consider as separate lots fields that have different proportions of legume, because that will affect both the digestible fiber and the protein available. Then each lot, as you divvy up your forage supplies, should be analyzed separately, and then you can start to match the quality of the forage to your needs. Now, we usually work in terms of relative forage quality, which is an estimate of digestible fiber intake in animals. And if you look at this graph here, you can see that for milking dairy cows, we'd like to see roughly 140 or higher. And if you had drought stress forage, you could have quite a bit of that, because while the tonnage is down, the quality is often up. On the other hand, if you have dry cows, then that's where you would feed that 100 to 120 relative forage quality. I list stockers on here. Stockers, we'd like a little bit more, assuming we want a good rate of gain over winter and a reasonable body score by spring. And the same thing with a beef cow and a calf, which probably don't have now, but you will have towards spring. Now, if we look at, again, the same kind of chart, but this one accentuates stocker cattle, which we had on the previous start. It also talks about horses. You can see that we have a higher quality for a nursing mare or a hard working horse, but a lot of people have what I'd call idle horses, which are basically just ridden for pleasure periodically, and they don't need nearly as high a quality forage. Ewes with lambs need higher quality. Lactating ewes need about the same quality as lactating dairy cattle. And the same thing as a doe with a lamb. If you have red deer or others, a ewe doe that's not lactating doesn't need as high as quality as one that is. So this chart will help you determine how to assign the lots of forage that you have based on quality to get the most performance from your forage that you have. Now, I'm going to take a little different approach than I'm sure you were expecting. But as we're thinking of alternatives here, and as we're trying to maximize what we get from our reduced forage supply, the first and most important thing is to minimize storage and feeding waste. And you may not think about that, but Generally speaking, I see many farmers waste at least 30% of the forage, sometimes as high as 50. So if once you've determined the amount you need from the previous graphs, you need to figure in how much is going to be wasted and add that on to the amount of forage that you need. So if you come up needing 4.6 tons, as we showed in one cases, and you're wasting 30% of it, then you need to add 15 tons to that. That's a huge economic cost. And I'd like you to consider that waste is worse than loss. That, as Thomas Edison said, the time is coming when every person will keep the question of waste before him constantly. And that's one of the biggest things that I would like you all to think about through this winter period. So recognize that as you have round bales, it will take each bale format. This brown around the outside is basically spoiled forage. It's lost. And if we look at how much of the hay that is, and I apologize that this is in English units, but if we take the 4 outer inches, and that's probably about 10 centimeters, that is 25% of a 6 foot diameter bale. So it's a huge amount of loss that's occurring, and the cattle likely won't eat it. If they do, they won't perform very well. We need to think about preventing this. So storage losses can be reduced by, and I don't have a good picture of this, but the first and most important thing is to keep round hay bales off the ground. If they're sitting on the ground and you get rain, like you're going to have over the next couple days, the soil gets wet and the bale soaks up that rain like a sponge, and then it starts to spoil and you see that brown like we showed. So put the bales on a board, on an old tire, on plastic, on anything, and this is a change that you can still make for your bales. You can go up and raise them off the ground if they're not already there. Lastly, I'd like to think about keeping round bales even away from trees. You see these bales set here under some pine trees. You see how rain and snow has dripped off the trees and has caused losses. We probably have lost over 50% of the bales in this picture, and hopefully none of you have anything like that to show. The other thing to keep in mind is it's not too late to cover bales. Round bales do shed a lot of water, but not all of it, and not snow. And so covering, either piling them and covering them or covering them independently, is a way to save another 5 or 10% of the forage that's in those bales. First, get them up off the ground. That's most important. And secondly, cover them. Secondly, thinking about baleage, and I presume many of you have made baleage. I think that's a good product. But think what the site will look like after rain and store in a well-drained site. Here's a picture of some bales floating in a pond after rain. Obviously, the person put those in a low area that rain ran into rather than a hilltop. Don't place under a tree. I mentioned that for hay, but it's especially true for baleage because birds land on the trees and then they come down and land on the wrap baleage, and their claws will cut holes into the plastic and leak oxygen in and cause loss for you. Lastly, too sensitive. If you have baleage, clear the residue or ground cover from about 30 meters around the bales, especially if rodents are a problem. Mice and voles and other critters like to go up to the bales, and they'll do it if they have ground cover. If you remove the ground cover, then hawks and other things can minimize the mice problem and minimize the holes in your bales. Now, if you have baleage, it's important to go around and check them periodically and cover the holes with tape. Now, I would not recommend this tape. This plastic tape does not last on the bales. The best is to use the fibrous tape, and then once you put it on, it stays there. But it's worthwhile to run around the bales once a week or two and check for holes and plug any holes that you have. Now, if you have holes, you get oxygen going in and get mold growth. But if you really have kept it mold free and you see a square bale on the left and a round bale on the right, when you get white mold like that, that means oxygen has gotten under the plastic and into the bales. There are only two reasons for oxygen to get in. One is your plastic was of poor quality, and the other is that you didn't put enough layers on. We generally recommend 6 layers of plastic on wrap bales, 8 if you're going to buy the really cheap plastic. So do consider, look at your bales as they come out. The good news is this mold is not detrimental to animal health. They may not like it as well and they won't perform on it as well, but it's at least not toxic. Lastly, the reason for wrapping bales and buying good plastic is that the good plastic has more UV protection. And so what you see probably won't happen over this winter. So I imagine most of you won't run into this, which is good news. But if you tried to leave it through next summer, that plastic with less UV inhibitors tends to crack and break, let oxygen in. Also, oiled sisal twine is hard on the plastic. So use good plastic, use untreated sisal and or net wrap, and again, buy a good plastic for your bales. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is I know a number of you have bunkers or piles. It's important that you've covered the piles well. It's important that you have packed the silage well. And here's an example from a study done actually in Kansas. and the important point that I want to make out of this is if you look at that spoil layer on the top, in this case, that was 18 centimeters. That is not how much spoiled. That is how much is left after the spoilage occurred. And generally, we figure that if you got a brown layer, in this case of 18 centimeters, you lost 3 times as much silage. So that would be approximately 60 centimeters. So do watch, pay attention. Consider that the thickness of the spoil layer is 1/3 of the lost silage. How important is that spoilage to you? Especially if you're short on forage, you're going to be tempted to feed it. If from the same studies that were done, if we had 4.5% spoilage mixed in with the silage, we reduced the digestibility of that forage from about 63 down to 55. So we lost about 8% units of digestibility. If we went up to 10% spoilage, then we lost about 10 units of digestibility. In addition, the animals don't like it, so they don't eat as much. And what we see is in this example, if there was no spoilage, the intake was almost 2.4% of body weight. But at 5.5% spoilage, it went down to 2.2, and at 10.7% spoilage included, it went down to 2.1. So if you include this brown spoilage from the top of the silo, the digestibility of the entire silage ration will decline and the intake will go down. So it's something to keep in mind. We can't do much about silage sporage anymore except to make sure that you have it good, well covered. But do think about that as you go forward. Now, so one really important way to stretch your forage is to minimize storage losses. The second important way, and that will do more good for you than anything, is to minimize feeding losses. Now, I'm sure nobody in Nova Scotia does this, But here's a couple pictures of cattle being fed just a bale and access to it. And you can see what happens on the left there. Our data would suggest that generally, if you feed just a loose bale and let cattle up to it, you can expect about 40% feeding loss. You can see in both cases all this matter that the cattle are on, and even a couple horses on the lower right. But once it's trampled on, once it's defecated on and urinated on, the cattle aren't going to eat it. So putting a loose bale out means you'll feed 60% and lose 40. Um, a ring feeder is the most common feeder, but it is important to think about design. Good feeders can get your losses down to 5%. A poorly designed feeder can still result in 30 to 40% loss. Now, I'm going to talk to you about the four kinds of feeders. The study was done in Michigan that is really interesting. They tested the four types of feeders. A cone feeder is the cheapest and what most people use. A cradle feeder you may have, it has sloped sides. It's a little bit better than a cone feeder because you see this area underneath the slant. The thing to keep in mind with a cone feeder and any of the other feeders is when cattle and sheep go up to eat, they go up, they grab a bite, and they back up. And they chew it until the forage on either side of their mouth falls off, and then they swallow what's inside their mouth. So on a ring feeder, if they take a bite and back up, it falls in that area around the outside. On this cradle feeder, they can either fall outside or in this catch area. And if it falls in the catch area, then the cattle will still eat it. So let's go down. Here's a picture of the ring feeders, and you see the losses there. Um, here's a picture of the cradle feeder. And again, you see losses are significant, but there is a potential to catch some of it back along the edge. It's a little too sensitive. I'll try doing it this way. This is a trailer feeder. Some of you may have that. Frankly, that's not a really good idea, particularly for beef cattle, because you have significant losses, as was shown here. But the other thing that another study has shown is that when you have a trailer feeder, the boss cattle go up and down that line and chase all the other animals away. And they only get up there a smaller percentage of the time, and it reduces their intake. So a trailer feeder is really undesirable because your losses are high and it reduces the time that cattle can be, that the other than boss cattle can be at the feeder. This is an example of a cone feeder. I don't know how well this shows up on the picture, but the idea is that there is an inner area that that holds the hay. Here's a better example. You can see the inside frame. You can see it holding the hay bale up. Now, again, while this costs more, this is a much more efficient hay feeding system because when cattle, horses, or whatever take a bite and back up, then the hay that fell off either side of their mouth drops down in the feeder and the cattle will come back and eat it. So you don't have the losses. Now, in this study, the four types of feeders, you saw the dry matter losses. The cone feeder had the lowest losses. The ring and trailer, well, the ring feeder was next, and the trailer and cradle feeder were the highest feeding losses. The difference in losses between these feeders was 10%. Are you willing or interested to buy 10% more feed because you maybe have a less efficient feeder system? Something for you to think about. So the first and most important thing you can do is to check to make sure that your forage is preserved to minimize storage loss and that you're going to feed it in a way that minimizes the feeding loss. Now, let's go down and talk about some of the alternatives that we can think about. Um, Crop residue is a good alternative. Corn, small grain, soybean. And then if we can ammoniate it, we can improve the crude protein and the fiber digestibility. I know there's not that much ammoniated nitrogen available in your province, but it might be worthwhile checking into. Ammoniation is a very simple process. You put a sheet of plastic over the pile, you pump the ammonia in about 1 or 2% of the weight of the feed, and leave it set for a week or so, and then you can take the plastic off. You know, it's interesting to me from studies that we did years back. We really don't like the smell of ammonia, but cattle love it. They will choose ammoniated hay or straw over unammoniated forage all of the time. Now, the one thing I do want to mention about crop residue is there may be some opportunity for some of you to get potato tops. Not a good idea. The potatoes that you grow contain a compound called selenium, which is detrimental to all animals. So stay away from any soybean potato residue if you have it. Now, sweet potato residue is okay, but not the potatoes, the white potatoes that you grow. Along with this, though, it might be worthwhile to look around and see if there are some other alternatives. Corn cobs are a really good feed, especially if you can get them ground or chopped. Oit hulls, we normally just pile them up on the ground or haul them away. Chaff, all of this has good carbohydrates in it that will provide good energy for your animals. And you might want to look around and think about some of those things. Also, think about waste of local produce. You do grow some carrots, broccoli, and apples. And if there are any processing plants, they might have some waste. Whatever waste they have is carbohydrate that would be good to feed to your animals. Same things with potatoes. Like I said, the tops are not good, but the potatoes themselves are fine. Potato peelings, cold potatoes, rejected French fries are wonderful dairy, cattle, and sheep feed. The main thing you have to pay attention to with each of these is that if you have big chunks of potatoes or maybe even carrots, you might need to chop them up a little bit so that you don't have any of it get struck in the throat of the animals. Distillers' dried grains are another good source of energy for you. I'm sure that there are a few breweries in the province, maybe a couple distilleries. They have some waste product that would be worthwhile looking into in all cases. Then I throw this one up just as an example, looking at the extreme. And years back when I was working with one farmer, he actually had access to a chocolate manufacturing facility. And he was able to get waste from that chocolate plant to feed his cattle and keep them going throughout the winter. Now, mind you, the milk still stayed white for his dairy cows, but chocolate was a good carbohydrate source that he could feed to those animals. So you have some options as you look at what you have. The first thing is to figure out where you're at. What supply do you have? What is the quality of the supply? So determine your needs, assess your forage inventory, assess the quality, do a very critical analysis of your storage situation and your feeding situation and decide if there's anything you can do to increase the efficiency and reduce the waste. And then lastly, do think about some of these alternatives. Our ruminants, our sheep and our cattle can use any carbohydrate from paper on up to stems or whatever. We may need to do some things to maintain needs for milk production or um, other performance, but they can survive on significantly less than that. So determine what you have, assess your forage inventory, look at the quality of the different lots and feed each lot to the animal that it best suits, minimize losses, and explore alternatives. Now, we did have a couple of questions that came in before this started, and I'll just go over those quickly. The first question was, is it detrimental to mow grass or legumes during a period of severe drought? And the short answer is no. Now, what I usually use is you should think about whether or not there's sufficient tonnage to justify the cost of harvesting. And that generally means that you need something around 20 to 25 centimeters of height. If it's less than that, it's probably not worthwhile harvesting. You might just wait for the regrowth to come back. But harvesting will not hurt the stand. Is there an equation similar to relative forage quality for beef? And as you saw in those graphs, relative forage quality is appropriate for every ruminant. So dairy, beef, sheep, even deer, it's entirely appropriate for because they all have about the same digestion. They all are going to eat just 2 or 3 times a day and then ruminate and digest that forage. It's appropriate somewhat for horses because you have an energy value, but is not as definitive as it is for ruminants because horses need continuous feed throughout the day rather than 2 or 3 large feedings. I hope we gave you some information that is pertinent to sheep. Most everything that I discussed is appropriate for all categories of animals, with horses being a bit different. The other question that was asked about protein tubs. And if you're feeding a lot of residue, you're probably low on protein. You might be able to overcome some of that with some ammonia, but a protein tub is a good way to work to overcome that. The two major things that I would encourage you to think about with protein tubs are: one, buy a quality tub. The cheapest tubs have more filler and less protein and energy. And as you pay a little more, you get more protein and energy in that tub. The other thing is to watch the consumption of the tub. If the animals are consuming more than they should be consuming, then it means they're not getting enough forage. So you need to have them full so they don't overeat out of the tub. But with those two considerations, protein tubs are a good tool. Let's see. The last question that came up was that I got written down was, is there anything that we can do to overcome the drought that we had last year to help our forage? Of course, nothing's going to make it grow into the winter. The question is how to get it to green up as quickly as possible in the spring. And the main thing that I would consider is to look at the nitrogen needs of your pastures. If they're heavy grass, you might want to put 25 kilos per hectare down about the time that they would start to green up, which would be about April 1 in your environment. And I would soil test and see what else might be needed for them. If you have over 40% legume in the pasture or hay fields, then the legume should be adequate to provide nitrogen for the grass. You might then want to look at the potassium and sulfur contents and make sure that you have adequate supplies of that. So, do we have any other questions that have come in that we want to address?
So we have a question that just came in that asks thoughts on daily windrow feeding on pasture with a bale processor, like a Hustler brand.
Yeah, I'm going to say something that's unpopular. I know there's been a lot of work done in Western Canada on unrolling bales on pastures. And if you have a lot of forage and can afford to waste some, I think it's obviously cheaper than having a feeder and less trouble. The consideration is that the more you put out, the more you will lose as the cattle trample on it. I have seen some regions where if you put an electric fence down the middle after you unroll the bale, then the cattle can't walk across it. And then their consumption of that forage goes from, about 60 or to 65%. It may go as high as 75%. So an electric bale down the middle will keep cattle from crossing it. Once you unroll a bale and the cattle trample on it and urinate and defecate on it, they're not going to eat it. But it is cheap.
Is using any winter stockpile a good strategy before the snow gets too deep?
Well, so absolutely, yes. I would encourage you to look into grazing whatever residue you have. Those grasses don't need any ground cover. In fact, it's better if they don't have it. Uh, you say before the snow gets too deep. We've got some people here that graze sheep 11 months out of the year, and they're making them go through 15 to 20 centimeters of snow to get to it. Cattle, we can go as deep as let's see, 12, about 25 centimeters. So the first answer is yes, I would start grazing immediately. Uh, Mainly watch not to do it when the soil's too wet so you don't tear up the sod. But you can graze under probably more snow than you're thinking you can.
We had a question come in during the registration that was asking about feeding, comments on feeding straw as a forage.
Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with it. It has fiber content. You're going to want to feed it to animals that are closer to a maintenance diet. So dry cows, non-lactating sheep, whatever. Um, in all cases, you might be ahead if you can get it chopped up a little bit. The straw would be especially good if you could get it ammoniated. But even if you can't, I would still feed it with the leaves and stuff. There's good fiber in there. The animals on a maintenance diet would use. It would not be so good for lactating cattle or sheep, or and certainly not for horses, because the fiber will come in and fill their stomach, and they won't be able to get as much energy out of it. But it will keep maintenance animals going.
Are there any more questions from anyone that's joining? I think we've covered off what has come in as registration questions.
Is molasses still a good additive to bad feed?
So question coming in from the room that I'm in asking if molasses is still a good additive for feed that is poor.
Or, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Um, and that would be something good to mix with the straw in particular because it would have, well, molasses does two things. It increases palatability, so the cattle like what they're being fed better and will eat more, but it also is a very good energy source. So molasses is another good choice. Yes.
So we have another question here in the chat. What kind of products do you use to ammoniate? I don't know how commonly that would be happening in the province. So maybe you can provide a little bit more insight on that.
Yeah, I'm kind of afraid it's not too available in your province. In many parts of Canada and the United States, we use anhydrous ammonia as a fertilizer. And so, if you can get somebody to deliver a tank to your farm or of any kind, then all that you have to do is take a hose off, is cover your whatever you're going to treat with a sheet of plastic. And we just went around and took a shovel and put a little dirt around the edge of the plastic to hold it down, and then pumped the anhydrous into the pile of forage, and it will fumigate essentially that forage, soak into it. And anhydrous does two things. First off, it increases fiber digestibility, which is something you might need, well, certainly would need on straw and maybe on other lower quality feeds. But it also increases crude protein, and the animals can use that just as they would any other protein source. So it's a good option, but I don't know if you have any anhydrous available in the province.
I see Shane Wood is on, who's our forage specialist with Perennia. Shane, you feel free to unmute and join in if you have anything to add to the conversation. If not, maybe after the fact we can chat and we can see if there's if there's any of it happening across the province and provide some follow up to the group here today.
I haven't, as far as I know, no one sells anhydrous ammonia. I know at least Agrimart does not. I don't know if Cavendish does. So that it's not a practice that I've heard of, to be honest, Dan. So it's really interesting to hear.
It really works.
And any fertilizer folks, sales people on the call? I think I had some register, but we're down in numbers. So feel free to unmute yourself and weigh in if you can. But we can do some follow up and see if it's a possibility. Yeah, I haven't heard much about it either, so it's an interesting concept.
Have you used other forms of fertilizer to improve straw?
No, it has to be anhydrous because it has to be a gas that will penetrate into the forage. So it doesn't work with any solid fertilizer, and it doesn't work with liquid nitrogen either. So um, if, I'm thinking it might not be too available, but it would be neat if you had it because it really does work.
Yeah, that's something I had never heard of before either. Me and Shane were actually texting in the background. I was like, "Have you heard of that?" No. So that was cool. I told you tonight was going to be fun that you were talking about something I hadn't talked to you before.
Well, if there is some opportunity, you want some more specifics, I can send you a pamphlet on it.
Yeah, sure. You can send it to me or Carrie, and we'll have a look through with Shane and see if we think there's something we can do with it.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Okay. I'll
Any
dig
other
something out tomorrow.
questions from the group? So we are hoping to maybe get Dan to come back again in the new year. Um, just where we're thinking the conversation around forage quality and quantity is just a little more important this year coming off of a bad drought year. So I will be following up in the next day or so with a evaluation form. And so please do take the time to give some feedback and make suggestions about what you want to see. I do have a hand up for iPhone. Feel free to unmute yourself and chat.
Hello, it's Donald Ag Rep in Western Region. Just wondering, Dan, if what kind of how much alfalfa needs to be in your stand there going into winter? Like if on a new seed, it something that we seeded there last summer and kind of got stunted through the drought. Um, just wondering how much should be there to for it to be viable stand next spring.
So unfortunately, I do not have good news for you.
That's what I was afraid of.
The first consideration I've seen over the years, and there's no date on it, but I've seen it, is that alfalfa in its seedling year kind of sets the mode it's going to be in. So if it's drought stressed like it was this last year, it's never going to be a very good yielding stand. Coming back then in answer to your question, I would say that if you had anything, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to do this in English. You'll have to change it. In the range of 10 to 12 plants per square foot, that would be wonderful of alfalfa. And then assuming that you seeded some grass with it and probably have um, a similar amount of grass in the stand. You can go out and actually do a plant count this fall yet until there's snow on the ground.
I I had a good look at it there on the weekend, and anyway, I don't. I'd have to do the plant count, but there's it's up and but it's not near as what it was. It seed just sat there all summer, and it was a dry, sandy piece. And anyway, I guess we'll wait. It probably won't be good enough in the spring. We'll probably have to till it up and replant it. But
Well, a lot of people keep them. I'm just kind of warning you. If they do keep it, think of it as a short-term stand because it isn't ever going to be gangbusters for yield.
would it be worth no tilling some grasses into it next spring?
Absolutely. Um, I don't know what you'd use, some fescue, orchard grass. You guys use a lot of Timothy, don't you?
I'm trying to get
Yeah,
them off
moving to
the Timothy addiction.
It's good. Yeah, Timothy's a bad idea, but if you're going to do something, the reason I don't like Timothy is because it doesn't have a good seasonal distribution of yield. It's pretty much a first cutting crop and then goes away. If you put in some tall fescue or meadow fescue or orchard grass, then depending on the variety, they will have more yield in your second and third cuttings.
Yeah, the folks that really, really love their Timothy, I like to try to convince them to pair it with some like a fescue because then the Timothy's there for your first cut, but you've still got the fescue for those second and thirds.
Well, that's a good point, and that'll work. Any other
Is there
questions?
anything that you would recommend? Like we're pretty close to snow here, but is there anything last minute that you would say guys should go out and do for either their pastures or their forage stands before fall? Like before that snow comes in the next probably 2 or 3 weeks?
Your ground isn't frozen yet either, is it?
No, it's not.
So soil testing would be a good idea. Um, I would strongly recommend that and see where you are, and then you'll know what needs to be done to get a good growth next year.
I'll put a plug in that through Department of Agriculture, we're happy to provide you with probes and soil boxes, and we'll ship your samples for you. Can also ship your forage samples. So if that's of interest, just reach out to your regional ag rep and we can help make that happen.
We have
Be
the
good.
probes for testing the round bales too.
Okay.
And you get a 50% discount if you're a registered farmer on the lab fees.
And they're already highly subsidized to begin with, so our lab prices are really affordable. Any more
So
questions? No, go ahead. Sorry, Dan.
no problem. Just do really pay attention to the forage testing too. A lot of people skip that step and say it, oh, it looks the same, but there's a huge difference in protein and energy depending on when it was cut and how and was cured and so on. So do by all means consider maybe a bit more forage testing than you'd normally do.
I've seen a few forage samples come back this fall, and it looks like the drought might have affected the protein a little bit too. Do you find that often, Dan?
That it's low in protein because of the drought? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those microbes, well, the alfalfa wasn't doing as well, didn't give it as much energy, and so you don't see that. Um,
Yeah, I had a farmer send me a screenshot of his forage results because it was a beautiful stand of bird's foot trefoil and the protein was like down around 5. He was
Now,
pretty
the
disappointed.
one other quick thing that I mentioned the last time I was there, if you forage test, do pay attention to the ash content because a lot of farmers are going to have scraped the ground pretty good to make sure they got every leaf of hay that was out there. But if you're over 10% ash, that's not doing the animal any good, and it's particularly not good for horses.
I saw Shane unmuted before I started running my mouth again. Shane, did you have something to say?
I was just gonna comment an opinion I've heard that I don't agree with Dan is that there's no point in testing my forage because I can't do anything about it. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like it is what it is. I've already made it. I can't change it.
Yeah, the problem with that philosophy is you have lots of opportunity to supplement. So, if you don't care how much your cows are milking, then don't test it. If you don't care how much your stockers are gaining over winter, then don't test it. But if you'd like them to gain at a certain level, then maybe a little protein, maybe a little other substitute or would be a good thing, but you'd have to know what you have to know what you need to add. So, by all means, I would say when you have a short supply, forage testing is even more crucial than other years.
I agree. Thanks for reinforcing that.
Any additional questions? I will, when I do the follow-up survey to folks, I'm going to include the link to the um, Beef Cattle Research Council's forage calculator, I believe it's called. So similar to what Dan was speaking to earlier, there is a Canadian developed one for beef cattle. You can put your forage results in and it will spit out where your feed would be best used on which animals. So that's a helpful tool, but so that would be paired with your forage results as well. So if there's
Dan,
no
would you
further,
share the link to the calculator you were showing as well?
Yeah, I can just email that to you. It's a very simple thing. There
right,
are
we'll
lots of
share.
calculators around. They're all use the same principle. That was just one that made a lot of sense to me.
And that one is for all like beef, dairy, sheep, variety of animals?
Right.
Okay, yep.
They had a separate worksheet within a separate sheet within the worksheet for each category of animal.
Okay, great. We'll share that one as well once we get that from you.
And I'll wrap up with one more question. When we were talking about those alfalfa fields, if they don't meet that 10 to 12 plant per square foot threshold, and they're going to go in and no-till seed some grasses, should they go in with a red clover at the same time?
Well, it's certainly an option. Um, Seeding alfalfa into it won't do much good because of autotoxicity. And red clover is really a good choice if you're going to make not so much for hay, but if you're going to make silage or baleage or whatever. Uh, I don't like red clover for hay because of the hairs and it's miserable to work with, but that's just me. All right.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Dan. Thanks
Thank you,
everyone for
Dan.
joining us.